You're not required to, but if you have access to it and would like to follow along, we're currently in the OneNote file of the modal node system, MNS presentation 1135 Excel modes formula. One of only 4 presentations we have thus far, but we plan on adding plenty more shortly. Also note that while in OneNote, we can spend all of our time analyzing the table, working on theory, but we also have another presentation by this number and name where we actually build these tables within Excel, practicing our visualization of tables as well as our Excel tools, which I highly recommend doing. Now, in a prior presentation, we went through the first part of this, which is to use the formula for the major scale. We often call it the major scale formula, to then create the major scale in the key of C as well as all other of the 12 notes. I'm going to give a quick recap of that and then move on to the new thing, which is then to look at the modes. And the modes is where things get a little bit wonky with the numbering system, which leads to like the way we think about intervals. So we want to touch in on that. But just remember that as we do this, we're going to end up with how many scales. If you're trying to intimidate someone, then what would you say as a music master? If you're a music master, what do you have to memorize? You've got to memorize 12 different sets or scales. You can say major scales. And then you also have to memorize 7 modes, so it'd be 12 times 7. But in reality, as we can see here from a shape perspective, which is what we're basically putting most of our time in on, as we can see here, it's more like we have one master shape that could then be copied and pasted, shifted up or back into the 12 notes, the 12 different positions, and then within that shape, you can use any of the points as the nodal center point, building, in essence, a new scale, leading us to some terminology that's a little bit more specific, often not what I see actually being used. That being, when we talk about a scale, usually that means that we're talking about something that's in ascending order, or most technically, that's how you would say it, right? It's something in ascending order, and you're starting on a particular note. So we're starting on the C, and then we're going to be counting upwards stepwise. Or in practice, I think most people mean it as this is going to be my tonic, my center point, the place I'm going back to all the time. Whereas if I look at all of these notes that are just the 7 notes, I can think of them more broadly as a collection of notes. So if you call them a collection of notes and not a scale, what you've done is listed all of the notes that then could have 7 center points, right? So you have the 7 notes, and then we could pick a center point, and whatever that center point is, we call that like the tonic. You can build a scale from that point. So if I had ascending order from any note within it, then we're going to say that that's going to be another mode. So that's where the modes come from. So notice they're all related, they're all tied together. So it's not really the idea that you have to have 12 times 7 shapes, but when we write them out in scales, that's what it ends up looking like. So let's map it out and try not to get overwhelmed by that, because it's really not that complicated. So then I'm going to say the notes, we numbered the notes, and then we also gave a letter for the notes. So I would highly recommend that we have a numbering system for the notes so that you can use some simple math. And remember, I'm also going to use an abbreviation of AB for A sharp or B flat, so that it's the simplest thing for coding purposes that we can kind of look at. The formula, we talked about how to derive it. We're now just going to think of it as a priori formula. For the major scale formula is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now here's the other thing that really kind of bothers me about when people present this stuff, because they often say that we have all these modes and all the modes are different when actually there's the same set of notes. And sometimes I feel like that's not made clear. Similarly with the formula, we could say that there's a different formula for each mode, but really it's the same formula. It's just that you're starting at a different point. I think that intuitively is a lot easier to visualize. So in other words, if I take what we looked at last time, we made this formula to create the major scale. Whole steps represent that we're going to take two steps, and a half step represents our baseline unit of distance, which is a 1 step. Our formula would make sense intuitively that we take 2 steps, 2 steps, 1 step, 2 steps, 2 steps, 2 steps. Why? Because normally we take 2 steps because it's too close together if we don't take 2 steps, right? So that's good. The formula will look like this: 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, and then 1 brings us back home. If we apply that formula out to our key of C, which I'm going to say is number 4, using a number system, 4 plus this 2 gets us to 6, 6 plus this 2 gets us to 8, 8 plus this 1 gets us to 9, 9 plus this 2 gets us to 11, 11 plus this 2 gives us to 11, 12, 13. But remember, there's a circular form, so we don't go above 12. So if I'm 13 minus 12 gets us to 1, and then 1 plus this 2 gets us to 3, and then 3 plus this 1 gets me back to the 4 as we go around in the circle. Now you can imagine then, well, what if I make this the tonic? What if I make the D the tonic? Well, then you're going to have the same collection of notes if I make the D the tonic, but you can also imagine that I build the formula off of the D note. What if I build the formula off of the D note? Well, all I would do is start the formula from the second bit because I'm starting on the second node. See how it's not exact, it's not really a different formula because it's just going to say, okay, I'm going to start from here then. So if I go down here and check that out, if I make the D the starting point, so now I just pulled this D and made it the starting point, then I would apply the formula out starting here at this 2. So right, so then you'd have a whole, half, whole, 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 half, and then whole, which would be 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2. So that means if I'm on the 6, which is a D, then I'm going to say apply the formula from that second point, and I get the same collection of notes. These are called relative scales. So we'd say this is 2, 6 plus 2 gets me to 8, 8 plus 1 gets me to 9, 9 plus 2 gets me to 11, 11 plus 2 gets me 12, 13. There's only 12 notes in the musical alphabet. 13 minus 12 is 1. 1 plus 2 gets me to 3. 3 plus 1 gives me to 4. And 4 plus 2 gets me back to the 6. So that's what we want. So from a practical standpoint, the general idea when you're playing is usually going to be, hey, look, I've got the same collection of notes here, and I'm going to make a different note, basically the tonic. And if I do that, I'm in essence playing in a different mode is the general idea. Now there is utility to thinking of your collection of notes as being spaced out by the formula. So there's 3 ways we can imagine, let's say, the scale degree. There's 3 ways that we can kind of think about it on, say, a fretboard or whatever your instrument is. One is that I can remember just like the shape, which I might do on the guitar in particular. So on the guitar, I might say, hey, look, how do I know which notes are in what I'm playing? I'm just going to remember the caged system, or I'm going to remember the pentatonic shapes or the 3-note per string shapes. Now, as you do that, a lot of people don't take it the next step and memorize all of the positions. They might memorize the notes, which is good. You can do that, but it's not the most effective thing. What's the most effective thing? To memorize the names of the modes, the positions, which you could give an absolute numbering system, which I would based on the relative positions of the major scale. But that's one way we can memorize. I've memorized all of these points on a shape perspective. That's one way that you can do it. Another way that you can do it is you can say that I'm going to derive this from the formula. So I'm going to derive it from the formula. If it was a major scale, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So I could derive that on my fretboard, for example. If I'm down here, I could say, okay, if I'm on this C, it would be whole, whole, half, whole, 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 and there'd be a half up here. But that's on one string, which isn't optimal for a guitar typically. In a guitar, I want to be within a 4-finger position. That's how it's designed. So you can see it this way. You've got a whole step, and then there's 5 notes between the 2 strings. So it's going to be 5, and then if I go backwards, 4, 3, 2. So there's going to be a whole step, right? And then a half step, and then a whole step, and then there's a distance of 5, 4, 3, 2, whole step, half step. So that's how you can see it on the guitar using that same whole and half step. which is possibly something that much more utilized on a piano, the piano being laid out on just kind of like one string. What's the third way that you can think about it? We could think about it by interval distances. I could think about my C here and say, let me measure each position around it in relation to the C. Let's take like this C, right? So this one's a 2-note away. I have a distance from the C in the major scale of a 2-note away major second. This one is a 4-note away major third. How do I know that? Because there's 5 notes here. Back one is 4. And then, right, a 5-note away, which is a perfect fourth. So we'll talk about that later. But those are the 3 ways that we can kind of map things out. They all have their pros and cons on the fretboard. But I would argue the best thing to learn for all of them is typically going to be the relative position, the modes, the nodes that you're on. All right, so if I go back on up, so that's going to be the idea. So now this one we mapped out in the key of C, and we also gave it the Roman numerals. We said that the Roman numerals can allow us and help us to build or see whether we build a major chord on it or a minor chord. Notice how useful that is, because now I can see that the 1, 4, 5, I build a major triad, which we'll talk about later, and the 2, 3, 6, I build a minor triad. And then this one is the diminished. That's why it has a little bit of a dot. Okay, so then if I was to copy this across, remember I can copy and paste this, and I can do this for all of the 12 notes in the musical alphabet. So that would be just like copying and pasting on the fretboard. So now I have this collection of notes. If I do it in ascending order, then that would be the key of C, major. And then I have this collection of notes. If I do it in ascending order, that would be an A. And then I went to the 2, and so we went to the second note, which once again, if it was in an ascending order, it would be an A sharp major, and so on and so forth. And we can go all the way across. Now all this is doing from a guitar standpoint is just like what it's doing with this worksheet. How did I build this worksheet? I copied this, pasted it over here, all of the relative cells copied over. That's exactly what you do on a fretboard, right? It's the exact same thing. So that's what's going to give us all the 12 different collections of notes. Now, when we do that, we say it's in the key of C. Now, what if I have the same collection of notes, but like I say, I make the D the tonic? Well, then there's nothing different on this from a shape perspective. It's the same shape. It's now just that I made the D the tonic of the shape. But if I was to build the formula from this position, you could rename the formula as 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, but really it's the same 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, or whole half, whole half. It's just that you're starting on the second one. See, that's how you want to visualize it. You want to visualize it. Look, I'm on Dorian, therefore I'm starting on the second position. So that means going from this second position, I'm starting on the whole step from there. Rather than saying, I'm on the Dorian, it's a totally new thing, and therefore I have to imagine a formula that's completely different and independent from the major scale formula. No, it's all the same thing. It's all connected, right? You want to visualize, you want to think in your brain that I don't want to build new things in my brain that are completely isolated if I don't have to. What do I want to do? I want to build on a foundation. The foundation I've memorized this formula. I already have it. So I don't want to memorize a whole new formula per se. I want to say I can build on this and say, look, I'm just starting from the second position. So that means I'm starting on the whole half, whole, half, whole, because I'm just starting on the second position. So that's going to be the general idea, but you can see how they think about it then when we write it as though it's a new formula, because now I have here it's a 6 plus this 2 is an 8 plus this 1 and so on, and we get the same collection of notes. Now you could say, what if I made this a D? Couldn't I make it a C? If I made it a C, what would happen? Well, then you apply the same formula, but it wouldn't be the related notes. We call those parallel notes. Parallel notes. And the reason they're parallel is because you could play something like a chord that's in the key of C and then use the parallel construction to make a Dorian kind of chord, which we'll talk about later. It wouldn't be in the same key diatonically